Okay, it's 3:30. My screen visible to folks? Got the right one, Sharon. Good. Okie dokie. We'll get moving here in just a minute. See, folks are kind of streaming in. Get this up on grid view here. There we go. Okay. Okay. A little under the weather at the moment, but hopefully I'll be able to answer questions in a coherent fashion. Or not, then it'll be an adventure. We'll see what happens. Anyone have any quick questions, especially logistic questions and stuff right now? Suddenly makes me wonder if I have my audio on, if people are talking. One second.
We can hear you. Is that what you were asking?
No, I was asking if I have your audio on. So I have a lot of different audio devices, and sometimes I'll have the wrong speakers connected, and I can't hear other folks. So people be like asking me questions, and I don't hear anything. And I'm like, oh, well, nobody has any questions. I'll just continue on. But no, apparently not this time, which is good. I'm on my headset today instead of on my like streamer style microphone, so a little different today. Okay, so yeah, let's get rolling here. So before I take direct questions on this, I'm just going to kind of show how I would sort of start something like this. So as sort of a reference, right? So if I have a fresh RMD and I'm going to be starting something that's like this with a new data set or set of data sets, and I've got a vague idea of the kind of things that I need to do, usually the first thing that I would do is I would start out with some sort of a setup chunk in my markdown document that's going to have where I load my data, but I also load my packages there. So if I insert a chunk, again, this is Control-Alt-I, and I'm not sure what the Mac equivalent is, like Command-Option-I or something of that sort. We'll insert a chunk. And because I want this to be where I'm going to set things up, I'll actually name the chunk setup like this. And a funny thing is actually our markdown will treat a chunk named setup slightly differently than other chunks by default. If you run any chunk after it, it will make sure it's run the setup chunk first no matter what, which is a nice little handy thing. And then I'll typically go, I would normally in a document say include equals false. And I'll do that in this case too. If you set a chunk to include equals false, nothing done inside this chunk will be visible in your document, but it will run all of the code. So this is a good way to load your packages. So what I'm going to do is I know for sure that I want probably dplyr, ggplot, and NYC flights 13, which has the data set that we're going to use. Okay. If I run this, I should get my normal little messages howling about overriding some functions. Those are not errors. And then I should be good to go. You'll notice that even though I loaded NYC flights 13 here, nothing shows in my global environment. The thing is I actually do have the data sets loaded. If I now say flights in my console, it's going to show the flights data frame. You don't actually have to do like data flights like this to get access to it. That just makes it show in your global environment. It's accessible. I don't have to do anything with it. It's ready to go. Okay, so that's where I'm at with setup. Are there any questions about setting things up or anything before we get to actually doing stuff?
I have a question about something you had mentioned at the end of lecture last week. You said doing something might make, like, it was like something about like unloading data and like the data being really big and then crashing your computer.
Yes.
Can you explain that one more time?
Yeah, so what I was specifically talking about is if you do certain joins, I'll give you an example of one. It's unlikely to crash my computer, but it would very likely crash other people's computers. So an example of this would be, let's do something gross and terrible. Let's say, let's join the flight's data. Let's left join to itself, and then just do, let's see what horrors happen. Okay, so a thing that might happen is you're performing a join, but you're joining on some variable that has many matches. So the thing is if, let's say that you match one data frame to another data frame, and you have an observation that matches to like two other observations on the same variable. So imagine you have a data frame on the left side where, for instance, maybe the value of month is 1, and you decide, like I'm doing now, joining on month. If I join it to another data frame and there's two observations that have a month of 1, it's going to join to both of them, resulting in 2 rows. What I've done here is I said we're going to join flights to it. There we go. It can't allocate a vector of size 35.3 gigabytes. So what I did here is by joining the flights data set to itself by month, I should have ended up with a data frame with approximately, let's see, that should be about, yeah, that should have been, what is that, about 9.4 billion rows or 9 billion rows or something like that. So I was actually kind of surprised that didn't work, because 35.3 gigabytes is nowhere near my max RAM. But you know, it's kind of surprising when something doesn't work. But that will crash most people's computers, and that's just a misjoin. So if you're going to be joining on things, you just got to make sure you're joining on what you want to. So think about it for a second before you do it, especially with relatively large data frames. Like this one is 336,000 rows. If you do duplicates, of course, it's going to exponentially grow and make your computer scream at you. So speaking of screaming, yeah, my RStudio is currently using 36 gigabytes of RAM, which is really not a problem at the moment. So I'll leave it alone. So yeah, don't do Cartesian joins or semi-Cartesian joins. A Cartesian join is joining an every observation to every observation. Yeah, things like that will happen. Very often what will happen is your computer will just grind to a halt. But in my case, I think, I don't know why it stopped at 35.3 gigs. It should have clipped all the way up to 64, but who knows? Anyway, other questions?
Just a quick logistical question. I thought last week you said you had to load each of the flight, airlines, airports, planes data sets, but then you said you just loaded NYC Flight 13 library and you had everything?
Yeah, well, the thing is it depends. So if you want them to show in your global environment, you load them with data. But the thing is they're actually there all the time. So if you remember the Swiss data set we used for the first homework, if you don't do data Swiss, the funny thing is it's still there. There's the Swiss data set, but it doesn't show in your global environment. It's just always there. But if I go, say, data flights, all this does is make it appear up here in my global environment in the top right. So what data does is it just makes it show in the environment like a normal object, but it's actually already there as soon as you've loaded the library.
Okay, so why would you need to do that? Like if it's already there, why would you need it in your global environment?
It don't. It's just if people like to know that they have it loaded and they like to look at it up here in their browser. Like this little environment browser lets you go and peek at things you have loaded. And people who are used to like Stata and things like that, very often they like to see the things they have loaded because this is kind of a variable view like in Stata. People like that, but in reality, you don't actually have to do that. But I say often it's kind of nice to do just to remind you what you got. So to go like, data, data carrier, what is it? Airlines. There we go. Data airlines and so on. And it just, it shows you've got them up here. But you don't actually need them. So, I mean, I could still do like weather, there's my weather data frame and everything. They've actually loaded with the NYC Flights 13 package. And that's actually the same for every data package you load, like Gapminder. If you do library Gapminder, you don't have to do data Gapminder, you just have access to it. Okay, so here's a question up here. By tail numbers, what does this mean? So let me copy this in here.
I'm sorry, I'm still a little confused about the examples for like merging data sets. So this is the first example in our class, actually.
Yeah, so I will run that and I'll talk about what it's doing. So, okay, so basically what I've done, it's missing. Am I missing something here? Oh yeah, there should be an arrange. Oh yeah, it's right there. Range descending down. Okay. Oops. Okay, there we go. So what this is doing right here, and I'll just run through it top to bottom, is just saying take the flights data set and then filter it so the destination is Seattle, and then select only the tail number variable. So if I run this down to here, all I have is the tail numbers of all the flights. I still have 3,923 rows. That's how many flights there were from any New York City airport to Seattle in 2013. So I have those. But then what I want to do is what I actually care about are the manufacturers of these planes. So these tail numbers uniquely match to a particular plane in the plane's data set. So if I show you the plane's data set, you'll see they have tail number, the year the plane was manufactured, the type of plane it is, who made it, the model, the number of engines, the seats, all that kind of stuff. It has all this information on the planes. What we actually only care about is this manufacturer column. So I need to figure out a way to match all this plane's data on to the flights that flew to Seattle. Well, I know that the thing that uniquely identifies them between the two of these is the tail number of the plane. So what I'm going to say is, okay, we have this thing down here where we just have the tail numbers of the planes. I want to join this onto the plane's data set. What do I want from the plane's data set? I want to take the plane's data and then select only the tail number, which I'm going to use as an identifier, and the manufacturer of the plane. So I'm essentially taking this data set, which is every plane in the entire system, all of their tail numbers and manufacturers, but I'm matching them only to the tail numbers of the planes that flew to Seattle. Okay, so this is a way to get the manufacturers of the planes that went to Seattle. If I mate these together here, you'll notice what I'm saying is join by equals tail number. This is just telling it what I want to join them together by. The interesting thing is, because I've already filtered this down to tail number, I could actually remove this line, run this code, and it's going to do the exact same thing and join them by tail number, because that's the only common variable name between the two of them. So it'll join on whatever have a shared variable name to begin with. I like to specify it so that I know what I'm doing. We're going to say any unique value on tail number will be matched to the same value on the other data frames. It's going to take these two data frames, which are probably a different size. Like if you imagine my fingers coming together, let's say my data set looks something like this, where I have these observations over here and this data set of tail numbers. It's going to push them together so that they equal the same ones. And then this one that doesn't match is going to drop it. And the result is going to be essentially the 4 fingers worth of data matched between them. It just lines the two data sets up, finds all the matches, and keeps them. That's essentially what this join is doing. Technically, it's a left join, so it's keeping everything from the left side. So for you guys, left side is this side. All the ones from the left side and keeping only the ones that match on the right side. Which results in a data set that looks like this. So these are all the tail numbers, all the Boeing planes, and you'll look, it has 3,923 rows. That's how many planes there were in the original data set coming from New York to Seattle. It's a left join, so it should have every one of these rows here, but it will not have every row from the planes data set over here unless every single plane in the data set flew to Seattle at some point, which is unlikely, but a surprisingly large number of them probably did. Okay. So this gives us this data set, the tail numbers and the manufacturers, but all I care about is the count of the number of planes from each manufacturer. So if I say count manufacturer, what it's going to do is it's going to go down and find, for instance, every time Boeing is shown, it's just going to tally it upward. It's going to say, oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's going to go down, and it's going to be like 900 Boeing planes. It's going to do the same thing for Airbus. 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. If I then get the counts, you'll see I have Airbus, Airbus Industries, Barker Jack, Boeing, Cirrus, and it's just counted up the number of these flights. So of those 3,000 something, 2,659 were Boeing. And then I decide I want to clean this table up slightly. So I say I want to arrange it in descending order by N. The N column was created by count. That's just what it does by default. So I do that. And now we have whoever flew the most plane, well, whatever manufacturer made the most planes that flew to Seattle is listed first. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, thanks so much. Oh, I'm curious, like if we change the order of the two data sets and use the right join, can we get the same outcome?
Yes. Let's do it.
Thank you.
So if I reverse this order here and I say, let's take the planes, tail number manufacturer. I take flights here. Let's put that inside here. Break this up, make it a right join. So what I've done here is I said, okay, we're going to start with the planes data frame. And then we're going to select only tail number and manufacturer. And then we're going to, I should break this out like that. And then we're going to right join it to the flights data frame, filtered to Seattle flights, selecting only tail number, and then join by tail number. Well, this is just the exact same operation, but the opposite order. If I run down to here, we're going to see this comes down to 3,923 rows like we had before. If I do the count of it and let it go, we get exactly the same count out. Yeah. And so the idea here is that you can do these operations, whatever makes sense to you, left join, right join, just by flopping, you know, with whatever's easier for you to do, or inner join or full join, right? Yeah.
Great. Is right join for left-handed people?
It can be. You maybe, do ambidextrous people use only full joins? I think that's really the, or I'm not sure.
Yeah, that the logic makes sense. It checks out.
Checks out. Okay, let's do this next one. So in chat, can we go through this question together? Use the time zone data in airports. Okay. Time zone data in airports to convert flight arrival times to NYC local time. What's the distribution of arrival times for flights leaving at New York City over a 24-hour period? Okay, we can do this. So airports, let me check and see really quick if the next ones are fast, really fast. Why does Pander give me a nice purple white table? Just come out plain. Because I'm not on a markdown done. So the reason Pander gives me a nice looking purple white table is actually because I have a special cascading style sheet behind my slides that gives that look. And if you use a theme in Markdown that has that, you too would have that. I think a couple Markdown themes have that. But that's just the way my slides are. I actually didn't do it myself. It came built into the slide package that I use. Next one, could you specify again what does the left right mean in left join, right join? A left join keeps all the rows from the first data frame you give it. A right join keeps all the rows from the second data frame you give it. So you have two data frames. Left is just which one you're keeping all the rows in. And then it only keeps on the left join, it keeps the rows from the right data frame that match something on the left. And then the right, it's vice versa. All the rows from the right side, only the ones from the left that match. That one, how did you load airlines data frame? Oh, if you want it up in your global environment, do data airlines, and then it'll appear. Otherwise, I was just using it because it's in NYC Flights 13 library. Okay, now I'll answer this question. So this is an interesting one. So use the time zone data in airports to convert these to NYC local time. So if I look at the airports data, I think the time zone is this -5, -6, so on, or this over here, the time zone column, right? Okay. So if we want to do this, so these are all America, New York time zones, they're all -5s. There's a couple of ways we could go about this. Figure out the arrival times for flights leaving over a 24-hour period. So that's airports. So if we look at flights, the flights have an arrival time that looks like this. departure times that look like this. So the question is, these are uniformly higher. I want to check something really quick. Mutate diff equals. Let's go. Those are strictly positive. Count. Yeah, there's some negatives. Okay, so, okay, that's about what I'd expect. Those are flights probably that bracketed midnight. Okay, so what we want to do for this question, is this is my own question, isn't it? That I haven't thought about in 2 or 3 years since I wrote that as a suggestion in my slides. So try to remember how to do it easily. Use the time zone data airports to convert flight arrival times to NYC local time. What's the distribution of them of arrival times for flights leaving NYC over a 24-hour period? Oh, okay, I get it. So what we gotta do is we gotta take these. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to match the flights to their destination airport, right? So we can do that immediately by saying, let's take my flights data, join it to airports by, let's see, for the flights, it's going to be destination equals the FAA code in the airports data. So if I look at the airports data, this is how I would figure this out if this was a real data set I was working with. I would be like, okay, what I want to do is I want to figure out what unique identifier is going to match my flights data to airports. I look at flights here and I'm like, well, it's something based on the destination. Destination is a 3-letter code over here. I'd look at my airports data and look for a matching 3-letter code. I look over here and I see some ones that don't look exactly right, but they are the FAA 3-letter codes. And I'd be like, well, I could probably match my destination to the FAA column in the airport's data. Let's see what happens. I take flights, left join to the airport's data by destination equals FAA. Let's see what I got as new columns. So I have all this stuff I originally had in flights, but now I have latitude, longitude, altitude, time zone, these time zones over here. Okay. So that's great. Now what I can do is I need to figure out some nice way to convert these to essentially every single one of them to be in New York time. The funny thing about this sort of question is I haven't actually given you the lecture yet where I talk about how to work with date time objects, which is in week, remember that's 7 or if that's week 5. It's one of these two. It's probably 7. I can't remember. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to modify our date time. So I could use like, I need to convert these scheduled arrival time or these arrival times rather into the correct times, which is actually kind of a challenge. So let's say time hour. That's the departure time, isn't it? No, what is that? What is this time hour column? Oh, I see. It's the date and the hour, but no minutes. Now that's stupid. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to figure out a New York time when this thing arrived. The easiest thing to do would probably be to say, oh, is there a travel time actually? Distance, hour, minute. That's too bad. So if we want to convert the time based on that, let's say mutate time is going to be equal to, let's see, yeah, let's go. String split. So the idea that I want to do here is I want to take this weird integer number here and convert it over to a, not the scheduled, but the actual arrival time, and convert it over to an hours and minutes, right? Well, funny thing about this question is I haven't shown you the good way to do that either, so I should really change that question in the homework, but I will show you tools I haven't introduced yet. What I want to do is I want to pull the minutes section out, and I want to pull the hours section out of here. So what I'm going to do, actually the easiest thing to do is string sub. Let's give me the, let's go from the first to the negative third position of that. Paste it together with the last two and a colon. Oops. Oh, right. Could not find string sub because you are in stringer. Okay. So what I did here, oh, silly Chuck, what are you doing? So I essentially took the arrival time that used to be numbers like 830, and I stitched it together with a colon to be 830 the time, and I'm assuming this is in 24-hour time, isn't it? Yeah, okay, good. This is in 24-hour time. Okay, and now what I need to do is I need to convert this into a actual date time object. So let's say date tm equals.
Sorry, can you explain a little bit about the string sub function and
Yeah.
Also,
was that it? Or so what the string sub is saying here is, okay, what I actually want is I want the first one or two numbers in this arrival time, because you see it's like 8:30. If I want the hours position of this, I want to get, say, 1, 0, and 10, but I also want to get just 8 over here in 30. So I'm going to have to play a game. I'm going to have to figure out how I can input a numeric position of this to get only 8 or 10. And the easiest way that occurred to me is this function string sub, which you're going to spend a whole bunch of time with in a few weeks here, is basically say, I want part of a string. So it's going to convert arrival time to text. And then it's going to say, I want the first character in this string, no matter where it is. And I want to go to the third from the last character. So it says, start at 1 and then count back from the end, 1, 2, 3. So this right here is going to give me an 8. This here string sub arrival time, -2, -1, says begin 2 from the back, end 1 from the back. That gives me the 30. So this is 8. This is 30. And then I stick a colon in between them, paste it all together. If I look over here, it's taken the 8, the 30, and stuck a colon in between to paste them together to give me essentially clock time. The idea is that once I have something in this human digestible clock time, I could then convert it using time date functions into an actual time date object. It's a little clunky, but it's one good way to do it. The other way, which just occurred to me now, is I could have just pasted together the hour and the minutes column. So a better way to do, well, actually, hour and minute is departure time, isn't it? 5:15. Yeah. So the problem is I wanted this arrival time over here, and they don't have a departure, or they don't have a time it was in the air column. I realize now that this question that I wrote is an incredibly complicated thing to do. I could do it very quickly, but it's going to get really ugly for all of you really fast if I do it the first way that occurs to me. Oh, there's a great question by the way on this. Why do I use paste 0 and not paste? Watch what happens if I use paste. Run this, look over this column. It has spaces suddenly. This is an R thing. By default, paste puts spaces in between the things you stick together because it's pasting like words together and it assumes you kind of want them spaced out. You can tell it not to do that, but the easiest way is to put paste 0 here. And this is no longer going to have spaces in it. So let me just keep looking at this one. It actually occurs to me that I'm going to have to introduce like 5 things we haven't gone to in the class to answer this question. So I probably should shelve this. So I'm not sitting here telling you how time zones work in R. It occurs to me that question was meant to be probably for week 6 instead of this week. So I should probably not do that one. Sorry to get you started on that.
I have a question
Yeah.
that relates to what you were just doing. So in MATLAB, you can specify the last element of a vector or a row or a column just by writing end. And it's really hard for me to stop thinking in those terms when I'm trying to code in R. Do you know of any way to modify R to make it have something like that?
No, you can use tail that way. So the unique thing about tail is tail will always grab the however n many elements at the end of something. So you could actually use tail to get like the last elements of a vector. Now, if you mean like the last characters of something like this, it's not quite the same. So it depends what you're after.
So in MATLAB, it'll just be whatever, if I say like row 1 from first element to end, it will give me all of the entire thing from 5th element to end. Or if I just do end, it'll give me the last element. And the really nice thing is you can do like end minus 1, end minus 3, and it would be able to do that sort of thing in a way that I find more intuitive. I was just wondering if you ever heard of anyone modding R to do that.
I mean, you could easily write your own function to do it if you don't just use something built in. Like, for instance, if I said like flights, and what I actually want is I want like rows, let's say, no, you know, I essentially want like, well, there's 2 different ways I could do this. I could say, well, I mean, if you want the last like 20 rows of flights, you'd probably just go tail 20. But in your particular case, so to use end, so you could do something like, you could write functions to do it, but it'd be a little bit odd in R. I guess it would depend on the use case. So like, let's say I have like the numbers 1 through 100 here. And what I wanted to do is get, see, the length of that object. Yeah, it would be a little awkward to do in R. Just due to the, yeah.
If it's definitely going to be awkward, it's not worth my time. The reason that it's so stuck in my head is that it's quick and elegant in MATLAB.
Yeah, and so the thing is in R, like for instance, like let's say I wanted to get, you know, this was this example, I've got 100 here. If I wanted to get like the last 10 elements of this using like the subset operator, it's not going to play nice with this because no matter what I put in here, all this, it's not going to automatically reference this object over here. I can't just say like, give me the tail of this object because it doesn't send this thing into here by default. And because of that, it doesn't play nice with that sort of syntax. So it's a little bit weird. There are hacks you could do using building your own functions, which we might get into, that we'll get into later in the class, but there's no elegant way to do it. Yeah. Okay, so this next one, let's see. After you rename columns, when using them, do you call them? Yeah, you have to call them by the new name. So in this example, you said scheduled departure time. I'll actually show you as an example. So let's say we've done flights, rename arrival time to be scheduled departure time. If I want to do some kind of plotting with it, I would have to say like x equals, it's going to be scheduled departure time like that. I would have to do something with that. This variable no longer exists because it's been renamed. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Next one. Is there a way to look at all the data frames simultaneously so you can more easily see the potential relationships? You just have to click on the individual databases. Yeah, there's not really a good way to simultaneously kind of look at all of them. What I would normally recommend doing is glimpsing them. So I would say like glimpse flights, and then what this would do is to let me see all of the different names. Glimpse is basically the tidyverse dplyr version of structure. It does basically the same thing, but it has a little prettier output. This would show me that I've got this many rows, this many columns. This will show me every column in the data set and then the first so many values in it. So glimpsing like flights would let me look at things and be like, oh, things that are likely to be joinable type things, the kind of things you join to another data frame are going to be like, oh, categorical variables like the tail number, the origin, the destination. You're probably not going to join on numeric variables like the departure time and the scheduled departure time, but you might if you've got the right types of data. You know, you kind of glimpse at it and then maybe be like, well, I don't know what to expect in weather. Let's look at weather. You look at weather and you're like, oh, origin airport, that makes sense. Month, day, hour, that kind of thing. A lot of continuous variables here you're probably not going to join on, but might be useful to you. And then stuff like time hour here, which is might be something useful to join on as a date time object. But normally you just kind of glance at them in that way, if that makes sense. Another thing you can do, of course, is you could also view them. You could say like, view weather, and it's going to bring up a Stata style viewer up here that you can browse around in and take a peek at things. So whichever works best for you. Next one. I was trying to find where flights landed when the temperature was under, okay, and precipitation was over using if else, but maybe I should use case when she uses these functions. That's a good question. In that case, I would probably, are you trying to create a variable that indicates that, or do you want to filter down to those ones?
Yeah, I was hoping to filter down to them.
Okay, then we will use neither of those things. So what I will do here is let's look for flights when it's really cold. So we're going to need weather data that landed when the temperature is at. So we can't exactly match that because the weather data is for the departure airports. So I'll do it for departure times instead of the arrival times. But yeah, join to the weather data. Let me see, can I just join on that? It will handle it for me. Year, month, day, origin, hour, time, hour. Okay. So we now have these flights joined to the weather data from the departure airports, which has the temperature and precipitation and all that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say we're only interested in flights where the temperature is below 32.5 and precipitation, you want precipitation none? Over 0. Okay. Precipitation greater than 0. So now we should get, and you can visually confirm this, that we should have only 32 degrees-ish. Okay, those are all like the right, and then precipitation is all positive. So this will get you that data frame really quickly. So I take the flights data and then left join it to the weather data and then filter such that temperature is below this number and precipitation is over this number. And that should get you what you're after.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Next one. Why use inner join to answer is there a relationship between departure delays and wind gusts? This is an excellent question. The idea with an inner join is if you want to discard anything that does not match something on both data frames. If I'm interested in the departure delays and the wind gusts, departure delays are from flights and wind gusts are from weather. It's not going to do me any good to get matches of weather that don't match a flight, but it also doesn't do me any good to have a flight that doesn't match to weather data. So basically, this is just for me to way to get rid of stuff that I obviously can't get a wind gust info on or a flight attached to it. So an inner join is a type of filtering join, dropping out stuff on both sides, just to make sure you get what you want. You could also do some kind of a match on both sides and then filter out unmatched things by columns using filter. I like to just do it with the match itself. Next one. In some languages I've programmed in, whatever operation I just did will be stored in a temporary variable, which I can then call to look at the shape of the data. Does R do anything like that? No. I ask because I find myself wanting to check the state of the data after 3 pipes without storing it in a variable and calling that variable, which feels clunky. No, in R, what you'd want to do is instead of storing it, you would just dump its output. So like I do here, I don't create the object, I just dump its output to console, and that would view it. It doesn't save like the last output. Technically, you can recall the last output, but it's a little strange. I forget exactly what that looks like. There is a way to call the last result, but it doesn't work in the same way and will break in strange ways. Because for instance, if you assign to an object, the output of the last object is the creation of the object. So it would just recreate the object instead of dumping it to console. Yeah, R is kind of particular in its own way. Next one. I changed the column name to arrival delay mins. When I use that new column name, can't found. I need to use the original column name. So it depends how you did it. if you give me the code for how you created it, I can probably answer that question.
The code of the
To generate
column
that
might
column.
change.
Mm-hmm. And how you used it afterwards. And while you're grabbing that, the next one, can we talk about why filter removes all NA values? Is there a philosophical reason for this? Yeah, so this is one of those ones that's kind of strange. If you think about it, if you filter, let's say you filter on something like this, where you do temperature below 32.5, precipitation greater than 0. There's two different ways you can handle missing values. If you have missing values for temp or precipitation, you have to make a decision. So if you're programming software like the filter command here, you either got to keep them or you got to throw them away. There is no in-between thing, which is what an NA is. An NA is sort of an in-between value. It doesn't have a value. So the philosophical decision made in the tidyverse with the filter command is by default, it keeps everything that generates a true and discards everything that does not generate a true. So this discards falses, but it also discards NA statements here. And that's just the way it operates. But R normally, so if I sort like this and I say, let's filter so that, let's say, depth delay is greater than 0. And then I can probably filter this to so by default, R actually keeps NAs when you filter on it. So if I say filter such that all of the observations have a positive departure delay in flights, notice what I get here when I filter down after that using dplyr to give me only where departure delay is in NA. By default, if you filter on a numerical thing and this variable has an NA, what it returns is not just the row that has that value with an NA in this variable, it actually replaces all other values in that row with an NA also, which doesn't make any fucking sense. But that's the base way that R works. So this way that it does here makes a little bit more sense, but they're both sort of arbitrary decisions in their own way.
Gotcha. So base R will take an entire row with an NA in it, convert it all to NA.
Yeah, with a single value. So this is the things that are NA in everything are actually rows that just had an NA for departure delay, but then it replaces all of their values in the row with NA. This makes no sense in that I can think of, but that's the way it works by default, because R is a language where you're expected to manually handle all your NAs and not be filtering on them in the first place.
Okay, so just going forward, consider NA for every operation you're doing, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess it was confusing having tidyverse drop anything with an NA because sometimes I would do a calculation. Like what I was doing was a diff time calculation. And I lost columns where there was an NA for one of the times.
Yes.
And so when I got all my output, I got fewer results than I expected.
Yeah, so long as you don't filter on it, you won't lose anything. But as soon as you hit filter, if you're filtering on that variable, you're going to lose them unless you specifically handle it.
Okay. Why doesn't it include the NAs and show you the NA? I guess that's my question.
You can tell it to keep the NAs.
Yeah. I guess like why doesn't filter keep them by default? Because it's easy to come to a spurious conclusion and say, oh, there's three results here, when actually there should have been 5, but 2 of them were not defined.
Yeah. And so this is one of those things, kind of like I said, sort of like a stylistic thing, is that people, when they've designed it, they've sort of assumed that if you want to filter on something that you want positives, you want matches. And so it's kind of a SQL-based idea that you return matches. You don't drop, you're not dropping non-matches, you're keeping matches. So it's yeah, and it kind of comes from the logic of kind of, it's not exactly SQL, but it's based on positive matching. And so like the NA is not a positive match. And so if you think about it that way, it kind of makes sense. But you kind of got to be expecting it.
But it's a decision. Okay, thanks. That helps. Yeah, just knowing where it comes from helps.
Yeah. Okay, so let me get caught up here. Having a similar issue. Okay, so let me pull all this code here.
Sorry, it's a bit messy.
Doesn't matter. No, that's not messy. You're just fine. Okay, so here this is saying, first I'm going to get flights going to Atlanta. Then I'm going to select a few different columns. Then I'm going to generate if they are early versus if they are late. And so this is take the Atlanta data and then mutate a new column called early late, which is going to be equal to these statements. This is if arrival delay is greater than or equal to 10, assign a late. If arrival delay is less than 0, it is early. And if it is arrival delay is equal exactly to 0 or less than 10, it's on time. Don't think you'll run into any trouble using that or, but let's see. But you might. Let's see. Nope, that seems to work perfectly. Okay. Next one, rename these. It's fine to quote these, but you don't have to. Oh, no, you're quoting because of the spaces. Better usually to put backticks. This will work, but yeah, that's okay. So what was the problem?
So when I tried to join, I did ATL clean and I did arrival delay minutes, and it said like data frame not found.
So wait, what exactly were you trying to do next?
So I was trying to join this ATL, these Atlanta flights with the weather, precipitation, and visibility.
Precipitation and visibility. Okay, so you only care about that, and then you want to join by
the Atlanta flights.
Okay, and specifically, so you're going to need to get the thing is here, the weather data is hourly weather data. So what we need to do is we need to match on. I'm still not clear. So you're trying to match on the departure times, or?
I'm trying to match on the arrival delay minutes and the like visibility and precipitation. Or I guess I'm trying to match the Atlanta flights with precipitation and visibility to see if there is a correlation between delay minutes and weather.
Okay. So the question is, what unique variable in this unique variables here are being used to match to the weather data? And what I'm seeing is I don't see enough variables you could match on here to get the weather data. Okay. So the thing is you probably want what is this?
Should I just use the Atlanta or should I just use the flights data without this new object maybe, or?
You could, or you could just grab the day and the hour, right? I'm keeping your naming scheme here, but to get the correct weather data, you actually need also need the origin, because the weather is only at the origins, right? And so you can get you need uniquely at least technically you don't need year, they're all 2013, but the month, the day, the hour of the flight, and which airport it's coming from to join to the weather data. And if I do that, then honestly, it's a lot easier if I just don't rename these, because if I don't rename these, it will automatically join on the correct ones. And then I can just say join to the weather data. I'll show you here in a second. Oh, day does not exist. Oh, because you dropped it up here. So let's go back up. Our origin. Day. Okay, do that. That looks good. All renaming inputs must be named. Oh, because this is in rename. We're not renaming those. Then join to the weather data. So essentially what's happened here is, well, actually it's worked, right? I've got the weather data with the wind gusts, the precipitation, everything. But what was key is that we needed month, day, hour, and origin to correctly match the weather data onto the flights. So I just added those columns back in and then just said join on everything that matches in name, and that works.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, so that was all that was missing, is the stuff on the variables to match on.
Okay. Thank you.
Chuck, just to jump on this, like I had a similar issue that as soon as I started renaming stuff, like what I mentioned earlier, it just couldn't find the objects. And so it's not, I'm not doing anything complicated like this, like what Anna was just doing. Like I wrote and renamed items, and then I tried to get the mean of it, and I put in parentheses the name of it with the backticks, and it still said it wasn't found.
Okay. Can you put in example code? Because I suspect it's one of two things, and I'll check it.
Okay. Yeah.
And in the meantime, let me run this one. So this is an example from the slides here where it seems like I mysteriously said, why am I dropping wind gusts over 250? And the thing is in the version of the NYC Flights 13 data that you have, the updated version, there aren't any of these erroneously large wind gusts. But in the original version of the data that I used when I made this class, God, now was it 4 years ago, it had a bunch of 1,200 mile per hour winds in it. And so when I say how to remove the outliers and why I chose wind gust over 250, it was just that 250 was sort of an arbitrarily one that high enough that if for these airports got hit with a hurricane or something, 250 would still get the correct values. But I didn't see any values that looked plausible that were above 250. So I just hacked them out. And that was an eyeball, and it's arbitrary. You work on some data set of your own in the future, you'll see that like some things are totally implausible. It's like wind gusts, 1,200, whether it's mile per hour or kph. Unless you're on Venus, those are not likely values for wind. And so you can safely like remove them. If you're working with Venus data, maybe up your threshold a little bit.
That helps. I want to, is there any function or formula to help us like filter outliers? For example, if I want to find the relationship between departure delays and the precipitation, how I judge which rows are outliers for precipitation?
So there are opinions on this sort of thing, and my opinion is that in general, the idea of an outlier is a flawed way to think about data points. So typically speaking, like there's outliers that are the result of actual bad data collection, which is kind of like this 1,200 mile per hour wind one. Like it's wrong. It's actually an impossible value. But if you have something that's a statistical outlier, like it's very high or something mysteriously, but it's not an error, you shouldn't probably remove it. Trimming outliers is just a way to make your models fit better than they should. And it's one of those things people used to do more often. Actually, one of the reasons people used to remove outliers more often in the past was that sometimes the statistical routines wouldn't actually converge with weird outliers with overscaled like variances that are too big. If you're some models back in the day, if you didn't rescale your variables in certain ways, they wouldn't fit. Multi-level models are still like that today, actually. Like if you have variables that have particularly high variances, they don't fit because the algorithm's bad. But no, I would say almost never. It's like trimming data. You're basically throwing away stuff because it doesn't fit the model that you have in mind is just bad, right? I mean, it's like, don't do that. But you have some logical checks, like that wind one is a good one. If there's physical properties that your data are violating, there's probably a problem and you should investigate the way that those data were generated. But aside from that, I don't really believe in the idea of outliers except as testing if they're influential in your models. And so for that, you can get leverage statistics and things, which I'll talk about in week 10 to show you how to do kind of like special model-y things.
Thank you, that helps.
Yeah. So next one here. Why sometimes ggplot doesn't represent the scores of the x variable as the number shown on the x-axis. Let's see what this does. Sometimes 0 instead of integer values. So it's because it thinks it's continuous. And so there's no reason. So if I do something like this, I'm going to assume this is month arrival delay. Let's just do flights geom call. It's probably not what you're working with, but let's see if it breaks. It's going to get angry at me for plotting 336,000 observations of the geom call. So I should probably use. No, it works just fine. The reason it's using these here is because it thinks it's a continuous variable here, whereas month is technically a discrete variable. It might fix it if you say, it probably won't, but I'm just curious if it will. If not that, then you could specify the breaks. Okay, it doesn't like it with integers. So what I would do is I would say a scale. I would say scale x continuous. Let me break this up. And then I would say, in this case, breaks equal, so months look like they go from 1 to 12. Breaks 1 to 12. And just manually set them. Would probably be the easiest thing to do. Yeah, because it's a number, right? And so it thinks, well, why would you choose evenly over unevenly spaced ones? Why privilege that? It's just a decimal number. It does automatically. Another thing you could do is you could say breaks equal pretty breaks, which is, I think, in the it's in the scales. Let me see what pretty breaks is in. Is it underscore? I don't remember where pretty breaks is. There's a part of the base that ggplot includes is a package that does pretty breaks by default. It will give you integer values, but I forget where it's at.
Could you achieve the same thing by doing as factor month or as date to month?
So the date, not exactly, because you'd have to convert it to a proper date time object. And the thing with date objects is they have to have a year, they have to have a month, they have to have a day, and they're a little weird. And I'll show you how to work with those later in the term. You could do it with factor, but it's gonna be kind of possibly, in this case, it will work, but it might be weird. In this case, it should work. Yeah, it'll work here because now it's been turned to discrete. And the nice thing is that these numbers in alphabetical order happen to line up with their numeric order. If the numeric order of them the order you wanted them in did not line up with their alphabetical order, it would reorder them in a way you don't want by default. So in this case, yes, that's actually a good intuition and it does exactly what you want. But every once in a while, it works weird. So, these things are fun. Oh, it's a pile of code. Let's break this up. I don't know what that filter is doing there. Let's see. Oh no, where's everything going? Okay.
Sorry, when I pasted it into chat, it got rid of all the formatting. It is formatted in my actual code.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, that's the one thing with the reason I like Slack so much is Slack tends not to butcher your formatting, whereas like Zoom, it's like they're not really expecting us to be sitting around pasting code into it. Okay, so let's see. You got that. Okay, listen, a couple things. Oh, I see. Well, I see exactly what the issue is here. So if I run this, that's fine. If I run this will give me a pander table. Could not find function pander because I haven't loaded it yet. So this will give me a pander table, which looks nice. But now here, if you want to use these things, the issue here is R. So this is saying, take these data, summarize it to the number of observations, mean departure delay. Well, R sees this and sees this word and thinks it's an object named departure. It sees this word over here and thinks it's an object named delay. If you want to use this as one object, like you do up here, put some backticks around them. You'll notice this is going to disappear, which says there's an error. And it's going to scream at me now. Departure delay is not found, right? Well, why do you think it's not found? Look at JFK flights here and look at the columns that are in it. You'll see how these columns you've renamed aren't there. Well, the reason for it is you've created this object and sent it to pander, but you haven't actually modified this original object to contain those columns. So what you actually probably want to do is say, write that back. And then say, for instance, send that to pander, and then run this there, and you can run these. You're going to get these NAs because you have some missing values, which you can then say NA.rm equals true. Do that over here. I'll explain that, which says drop missing values before trying to calculate the means, and then it'll work. So the idea was that you created the columns, but because you didn't write them back to the object, it doesn't modify it in place. It just did it and then sent it to Pander and it's gone. Without creating or overwriting the object, it doesn't add the columns. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. Next one, how do you organize a column from least to greatest? It's a range. So if I say, look at the flights data frame, and what I want to see is, let's see the highest departure delays. I'm going to say a range, descending departure delay. Now the highest departure delay is 13 hours and 1 minute. So let's rearrange the entire data frame to give me the highest departure delay first. Okay. Next one, here's an example of summarization. So what I want to do is get some NAs, right? Take the flights data frame and then filter, so the destination is Atlanta, and then summarize all those rows so departure delay is actual to the equal to the mean of departure delay. Well, the problem, before I've summarized here, if I look at my departure delays, if you scroll enough down and look at departure delay, might take me a minute, there's one. Missing values, okay? The issue here is that you can't calculate a mean of a value that doesn't exist. If I try to take the mean of it, it just fails and gives me an NA. So what I did here is I added an argument to the mean function that says, okay, I know you can't calculate a mean with a missing value. So what I want you to do is to delete all these missing values. This stands for NA, that is missing NA remove equals true. So what it does is it grabs this departure delay column, deletes all the missing values, and then calculates the mean, which is 12.5.
I had the same issue as someone else.
It's an incredibly common thing. And so this gets back to that idea that I said in lecture, poison in the well. Missing values mess everything up, which is what the kind of thing that's funny about the filter behavior we were talking about a minute ago is that in filter, NAs don't poison the well like they do elsewhere in R. Whereas in base R, they do. So NAs normally are supposed to manually handle. Did I miss any questions here? I kind of burned through a lot of them or brush over anything I need to return to. I think I got most of them aside from the question, the very first question that I ignored, basically.
Chuck, would you mind just scrolling back up to see? I feel like I've missed the syntax of that. So could you copy and paste it into the chat, please?
Is it this one?
Yeah, the jam one place, JFK. Yeah, it's just this first bit that thank you so much.
Yeah. Best way to find names that match between two data frames, I can get a list of true and false. Yeah, so you want the actual names. That's a good one. So there's a couple different ways to go about this. So the easiest is probably, well, let me think. I actually have my own function that I wrote to do almost this exact thing that I put in most of my scripts. So I'm sure there's probably some convenient, tidy way to do it, but I would use it in a base R way. I would say, for instance, let's say names of flights. If I do names of flights, % in names of weather, you're going to get that trues and falses. Well, what I could do is I could subset the names of flights using that, and that will get all the names and flights that match the names and weather. And you could reverse the operation, of course. So I actually have a function for this purpose that's called X and Y, which looks something like, so you get would be this exact. Just, is that? I think that's about it. And I could say X in Y flight's weather. Basically, you don't really need both of them, right? Because it's going to be exactly the same, but you could, this symmetry is good for doing other things than just columns. So this is a function that I just wrote, and this function says, print for me a list where it says these are the names of things in X that were in Y. And normally what I do is I'd rewrite the function so it actually grabs the object name flights and weather, but it's a little mind bending to write the code to do that. But it would sort of say which names are in which. And then I use functions like that to do matching. We'll talk about writing functions in week 7.
Okay. You're subsetting here with the base R brackets. If you wanted to do this with tidyverse syntax, is there a convenient way or is it a little clunkier?
Tidyverse is not really made for working directly on vectors. The tidyverse is for working with data frames. And here I'm actually working with the name vectors. So there's no sort of, there's no more elegant way to do it in the tidyverse.
That's cool. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I'm suddenly trying to remember what is the, I think this is called, parse one maybe. Is it dparse? No, it's not gonna like that, is it? I forgot exactly what I have to do to make that work. Any other questions before I sit here and write heinous code in front of people who don't want to see it? Should actually fetch that function.
Yeah, is today today's the day that you can still send us this file, right? Because like there's a bunch of people who asked questions that are like related to things I've been having trouble with, but I know I'm not going to be able to figure out unless I like put it into my own console.
Yeah, sure. I'll send it out. Yeah, just if you ask for it, I'll shoot it. It's just I'm starting with the template-based homework for this next one. It doesn't make any sense because it's just sending people the answer key.
For sure.
Yeah, no, I'll absolutely send this one out. Yeah, if anybody wanted the one from like last week, I don't think I sent it out. And if you do want that, let me know. I can send it.
I would love that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can do it. Assuming I saved it, I'll actually have to check.
If it exists.
If it exists. Zoom, let's see. CSSS. Yeah, it looks like I did save it from last week. Okay. Yeah, it's not dparse. What is it? Dparse one substitute. Of course. Substitute. Where is it? Should work. Any other questions? I'm very tempted to go and look for this function. There it is. That's the one I was after. Yeah. not. Need another function. Yeah, okay. Anyway, now I've entertained myself, so what else can I answer for people? Anything they want to do?
If you could maybe, this is more of another just how to think about coding question. With the tidyverse syntax, sometimes you need to refer to columns without quotes, which I think you were calling non-standard evaluation.
Yes.
And then sometimes you do need to quote them. Is there a way to think about when you want to do one versus, or when you want quotes? Because I know your base assumption should be non-standard.
Yeah, and so this is one of those things where there's very few situations where you actually need to quote the names in tidyverse stuff, but basically what happens is whenever you're going something that's not part of the tidyverse, you're possibly going to have to quote the variable names. So the thing about ggplot is actually ggplot, when you use variables in it, well, it can't use quoted ones. Actually, I'm trying to think. There aren't many times when, if you want the actual variable, like the column in it, you basically never want to quote it in almost all applications, unless you're subsetting based on it, like in base R. Like, for instance, like if I wanted the flight's data frame and I wanted to get the origin column, I would have to quote it. If I do this, it's going to scream at me. Whereas in tidyverse, I could say, and that will work. If I quote it,
okay,
some god awful reason, it will also work. So yeah, but with base R, you basically always would be quoting variable names. Is kind of what it comes down to. So as soon as you're not in something that's not in the tidyverse, you probably are going to have to quote it.
So with that example,
I guess I'm curious, like with the join function specifically, that one does want it in quotes when you select by a certain variable name. Is that just because you're calling the name itself and not the whole column?
Yeah, so actually what you're doing is you're not using the variable at all. This is sort of a thing where what it's doing as an argument. So for instance, if I say, here's a mind-bending one that'll be fun. Let's say left join to the weather data by equals matches. And I could say matches is going to be year, month, hour, day. I think that's everything. Year, month, hour, day, origin. That will work because what it's actually looking for here is not a column in the data set at all. It's looking for a vector of variable names to match on. So this is kind of a weird thing. See how I can give it multiple things? You wouldn't be able to do that if it was a column in the data set.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's actually
okay.
Yeah, it's just got to get the intuition for it. It's like, oh, that's when you basically need to use something quoted, is when it's actually like you're not giving it a column, you're giving it something else, like a lookup of some kind.
Okay. That's okay. It's coming slowly but surely.
Yeah, it'll click.
Thanks for answering all these sort of Mickey Mouse questions.
No, these ones are some of the most critical. It's just like it's getting the intuition for it is more important than anything else. So yeah.
Okay.
Tristan, you had a question?
So with that example, just I still have trouble not thinking in like indexing because of my long history in MATLAB. So for that example, if you did flights column origin, if I wanted to then do pipe, and then give me the first 10 entries, what is the proper way to write that? Okay, so there's no way to say like using indexing, saying like give me entries 1 to 10.
Yeah.
Oh, it goes before.
Doing the rows.
Yeah. Yep. Okay.
Yep.
I have another kind of general coding or R question.
Sure.
Can you clarify factor versus character? Because I understood the factor is like categorical data, but it seems like characters are too.
Yeah, they both are in their own way. So for example, what I'll do is I'll take, let's go flights, and I'm just going to say, actually, let's go distinct origin. There's only 3 of them. Okay, so what I've done here is I've gone down to the unique values of the origin variable, and I've created a new variable that's this origin, which you see as character here, recoded as a factor. You notice how they look identical? They basically are, except it gets a little weird. If I now say mutate, let's go numeric origin as numeric the original origin, CT origin equals as dot numeric CT origin. Okay. Now, this is when it gets weird. So these columns look exactly the same. They have EWR, LJ, and JFK. If I convert origin to a numeric column, I get NAs because you can't convert language into a number in any meaningful sense. However, if I convert the factor into something numeric, suddenly it says this is the number 1, this is the number 3, and this is the number 2. The reason is if you ordered these things alphabetically, this would be the first one, this would be the second one, this would be the third one. What converting it to a factor has done is it's changed it from being character to being a number under the hood with a label on top of that number. The reason you want to use factors is because they have this underlying numeric order, which means if I do a plot with ggplot and I use, say, like this FCT origin as a variable, it's going to put EWR first, JFK second, and LGA third. But I could change these numeric labels, and that would reorder the order they would appear on a plot. The underlying numeric levels are useful and will do work for us, and we'll see some good examples of this in week 5.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Next one. What is exactly passed when I pipe, for instance? This gives me the first 10 entries. Yeah. Oh, yes. No, that will not work. Okay. So this is weird.
How do I think about why that doesn't work?
Okay.
That's what I need to know.
Yeah, and so the idea is how pipe works. So the way the pipe works is it takes anything on its left side and sends it to the first argument of the thing on the right side. But the weird thing about this is this over here is a operator over here, which doesn't take a first argument in the same way a function does. But you know how you could do this if you want to just mess up your brain? Duh. Can't subset columns that don't exist because I will have to go, let's see, will that work? That will work. Okay, so to tell you what's going on and the way functions and operators work in R, when you use brackets like this, it's actually calling on this function here. So what this way, if I rewrite this thing up here, what you've actually done is done this, and then you said, I think that's what you've done. Yes. Okay. This is a shorthand syntax that actually writes and runs this function over here. Operators are special functions, and they work strangely. They do not work in pipes. If you want a operator to work in a pipe, you usually got to play around a little bit. There's technically speaking, there's a type of pipe in the greeter package that's made for sending 2 operators. I forget what it is. It's got some weird sign like that or something like that. Nobody ever uses it. So if you wanted a subset using base R in the middle of it, you need to do some funky thing like that. You'll never see anyone do it except people who are like true arcane R wizards, who for them this is just an obvious thing to immediately do. And so now you never would do that, but that would be how to make it equivalent. In other words, you wouldn't, right? You just wouldn't do it. It's a weird thing to do, but that's how it works.
And if I wanted to do this exact same thing, but instead of having it give me a tibble which has a character vector in it, if I just wanted the character vector, is there a way? Is there like a way that I could specify that with an operator when I'm making the Z?
Yeah. So basically, you want this thing to subset and drop down to the specific to the origin variable here from that. So that would actually be. No, I won't do that with a tibble. So if you wanted to pull it, what would be the easiest way to do that? So tibbles by default resist automatically coercing as a vector. And so what do you need to do if you want to actually do that? Well, I mean, honestly, the thing you would normally do would be you would take, that would be the way, the tidyverse way to actually do it with a tibble.
That's perfect. That works for me. Yeah.
Yeah, because the idea is that tibbles are supposed to resist being turned into a vector whenever possible. And so base R, if this was not a tibble, this was a data frame, it would in fact do that by default, I believe. Yes. Yeah. Normal data frames actually by default would already convert to a vector. Yeah, so that's what they call desirable behavior for a tibble, is to resist having that happen.
Hey, Chuck, so I'm trying to I'm trying to make like a data frame to turn into a table by like honing down on the like maximum or the like destination most frequently flown from JFK. And I keep getting this message, and what's happening is it like adds back in the origin column at the end of it, even though I tell it to select only my destination and then the count I did for those groupings.
So what's happening is that you grouped on the variable it refuses to drop, most likely. It's actually the data are grouped. So if you want to get rid of it, what you can do, there's no group here, so it's gonna get annoyed with me, but you can ungroup it after the operation that used groups, and then it will be able to drop that variable. You can't drop on a grouping variable in dplyr because it assumes that, well, if it's grouped on it, you can't just get rid of it. So here, let me actually grab your code that you've pasted here as an example. Okay. Regrouping output by destination. So the idea in group by here is it said you've grouped by destination and origin. So what's happened is it's collapsed basically all of the unique combinations of destination and origin together. But what's resulted is you still have unique values of destination that you're grouped on. So if we look at this, you have destination origin pairs. The data are still grouped by destination, the first grouping variable here. So you can't do anything with it. You can't then say, I want to get rid of the origin over here, unless you can put this anywhere. We ungroup it. If I do this, then you can do whatever the heck you want. And the idea is you just have to get rid of that grouping structure, and then you can do it.
Okay. And then for the rename function, can you do multiple renames of columns?
Yep.
Is it just separation by comma, or is it? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, almost everything in the tidyverse lets you do multiple operations in a single function. Mutate in particular lets you create a variable and then use a comma and then use the variable you just created in the same mutate function, which is kind of a weird thing to be able to do. Just because that calculates them sequentially. Any things people want to do, to see, places to go, people to be. It's going to be fun when I send the script out and people are going to see things like this up here and be like, I don't want to be in this class anymore.
Could you do an example of the across summarize? Like,
Yeah.
my question is, I tried to summarize some data and I did group by carrier, and I think it gives me a line for every flight of that carrier maybe. And I just wanted like, you know, an average for every carrier, for example.
Yeah, so I should have carrier in here. And then let's say what I want to do is, this is going to be a crude thing, but I'm going to say, I want to summarize every numeric variable. I'm going to say summarize where is dot numeric. Give me a mean. A.r equals true. That'll work. So this should give me one line per carrier because I've grouped only on carrier. And then I said, I'm going to summarize. This is basically saying, okay, I'm going to summarize across a bunch of columns. What columns am I going to summarize across? I'm going to summarize wherever those columns are numeric. What am I going to do? I'm going to take their mean. Just this says send the variable here and then do na.rm equals true. This should give me every numeric column in the data set averaged for each carrier. So that's like kind of a big one I could do. You could also, instead of saying where, I could instead say, give me the departure delay. I have to give it as a vector if I want to do more than one. Departure delay and say, what's a good one? Distance for the flight. Oh, whatever. Oh, okay. So I could do it that way. And this would say, give me the mean of departure delay and the distance. I could then add something like, I don't just want the mean. I, in fact, want the mean and the standard deviation. Oops. Unexpected symbol in flights. Oh, there we go. Now in this case, I didn't say to name them, so I'm going to say, give me the average. Equals that. Give me the SD equals. And then this will, by default, take the name of the variable departure delay, take the name in the list over here, average, paste it together to make a name, and then calculate the actual value based on the function I give over here in this formula. Complicated, but that'd be the way to do across statements.
And that's helpful. Can you explain then why, if you don't have the across function, like I'm not understanding why it gives me a row for like, it gives me so many rows for every carrier. Is that because it's looking at every flight or?
So it depends. What code are you running that's giving you multiple rows per carrier? So I'd have to see what you're running, because it should give you a one per carrier if you're only grouped on carrier.
Okay, hang on one sec. The only thing is I use my Atlanta clean object, so I don't know if you still have that.
Yeah, it's probably right here. rerun it. Okay, so you've got that. Yoink. Ah, I see. Okay. So the thing is here is that you haven't done a calculation and summarize. So this is saying I want my Atlanta clean, I want to group by carrier, and then you just have these variable names down here. So you're actually not performing an operation. Yeah, it should scream at us for doing this. So what exactly do you want to calculate? Do you want to get the...
I was looking for like the question I asked earlier, which now I know how to do, but averages for each of these, for example, by carrier.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, you summarize like mutate expects a calculation to be done of some kind. So I mean, I guess you could just do like exact same thing. I'm not sure what we would do with month, but let's just pretend we want an average of it. Month is not in here because it's lowercase month for me. Departure delay is not found because what's it named in my data set? Departure delay minutes. Okay. Yeah, so that'd be it. But the main thing is summarize needs to have a calculation being done. And so here we have to summarize only accepts functions that take multiple numbers or multiple values and reduce them to a single value. And so mean takes a whole bunch of different numbers and produces a single number, the average of those numbers. And so it works in summarize. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Anything else?
I got something for you. So I didn't hand in homework 2.
Okay.
I've been falling behind this term and not really handling my shit great. I don't need credit for it, but if I hand it in, can I still get feedback?
Sure, I'll do it. Yeah, just
awesome. Great.
Put it in and then send me a put a reminder comment on it. So put it in. Yeah.
Sure. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. I still haven't managed to go through the homework 1 peer reviews yet. I took my comprehensive exams this last week, and so I burned out into a tattered husk for a few days there. And then got super sick. So I have some sort of horrible cold right now, and I have a COVID test coming up, and I'm like, hopefully I'm not, a plague bearer. We'll see what happens.
All right, I'm going to go work on that. Thank you for this. And should I email a reminder about the
I'll just send the
markdown
script
files?
out as soon as I'm done.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a good one.
Yep.
Bye.
What else do folks have? Anything?
If we're combining the weather data set with the flights data set, there's no guarantee that like each variable is going to line up with another, like the correct one, right? Like the correct flight, the correct weather pattern for that flight.
Well, it depends. So the thing is it kind of will, because if you join the two together, assuming you don't tell it to join on any particular variables, the flights and weather data, the weather data is basically uniquely identified to it because it has everything down to the hour and the origin. So you shouldn't get like duplicates of a flight or something like that. But there are some flights that won't have matching weather data too.
I see. Okay.
Because there's some missing weather data, I think.
Right. Okay, that helps. Thanks, Chuck.
Yep.
Feel better.
Thanks. Nothing else? Okay, well, I will close down shop.